right, good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We're so glad to be here. Yeah, thank you. We are in our 51st year as the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore, and we're very glad to be here with y'all in 2026. Despite what 2026 has already ushered in. But that's why we need events like this and people like all of y'all in this room. So thank you for being with us. We were so excited to celebrate this necessary event, Jim Crow and the Asylum, Psychiatry and Civil Rights in the American South. We're here with the author, Kylie Smith, who is in the middle. And she is in conversation with Vanessa Jackson on her right and Jennifer Grant on her left. So I'm going to begin by introducing Dr. Jennifer Grant. Dr. Jennifer Grant is assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Health at Emory University School of Medicine and associated medical director of psychiatric emergency services at Grady Memorial Hospital. Dr. Grant received her MD and PhD from Emory University School of Medicine and remained at the institution for combined postdoctoral training in general psychology and health services research. I'm going to put her bio in the chat because it is beautiful and long and very accomplished. But Dr. Grant, we are so glad to have you with us tonight. Vanessa Jackson is a social worker, soul doula, and owner of Healing Circles, Inc., a healing practice based in Atlanta, Georgia. She also creates healing aromatherapy sprays through Dudley's Apothecary. And Vanessa is the author of In Our Own Voice, African American Stories of Oppression, Survival, and Recovery in Mental Health Systems, as well as Separate and Unequal, The Legacy of Racially Segregated Psychiatric Hospitals, which are monographs on the history of African American psychiatric experiences, as well as Robbing Peter to Pay Paul, Feminist Reflections on Therapy with Low-Wage Earning Women in Psychotherapy. So Vanessa similarly has quite a long and beautiful bio and is an incredible person who has worked with Charis for decades, and we're so grateful to her for being with us tonight. So welcome, Vanessa. And the person of the hour is Dr. Kylie Smith, who is an associate professor in the Nell Hodgson Woodruff School of Nursing and associate faculty in the Emory College Department of History at Emory University in Atlanta. Professor Smith received her PhD from the University of Wollongong, close, all right, in New South Wales, Australia, and came to Emory in 2015 as the inaugural Andrew W. Mellon Faculty Fellow in Nursing and Humanities. Her first book, Talking Therapy, Knowledge and Power in American Psychiatric Nursing, won the Lavinia L. Dock Award from the American Association for the History of Nursing and the American Journal of Nursing's Book of the Year Award in the area of history and public policy. In 2022, Dr. Smith became the founding director of the new Center for Healthcare History and Policy, which supports collaboration, knowledge sharing, and community building across Emory University and Emory Healthcare. The goal of the center is to build pathways and opportunities for students and faculty to incorporate historical insights into healthcare work that advances justice and equity. And the new book that we are celebrating tonight is once again Jim Crow and the Asylum, Psychiatry and Civil Rights in the American South. So welcome to you all. We will have an opportunity for our folks in the room to ask questions as well as our folks online. So if you're watching online, we have a great big audience online and a great big audience in this room, which I love. So if you would like to ask a question online, just drop it in the chat at any time. And if you are here in the room, there will be an opportunity. Just raise your hand and I will bring a microphone to you. So without further ado, please welcome all of these beautiful folks.
And okay, yeah, wow, that is loud.
Yeah. We need more chairs.
We need more chairs. Oh, I love it. We need more chairs. This is always a good thing. And also if people can get up and get down, they can join us on the floor. Okay. Well, we're going to start and we're doing maybe a little deeper introductions of ourselves and kind of why we're here in this moment. I want to say that I started out because I come to Charis early because I just love to look around Charis, all the good things. And I was drawn to this card. It's a quote by Ella Baker that says, "In order to see where we are going, we must not only remember where we have been, but we must understand where we have been." And I think that's really like the opportunity of this moment for us to really do a deeper dive into understanding psychiatric history and what it means and how it intersects with racism and all these different important things. Yeah, thank you for that beautiful introduction. I'm Vanessa Jackson, and I, up until maybe a year and a half ago, I was a practicing clinical social worker. But I literally burned my license after I decided not to renew it because I had evolved in something else. And I would have to say that my work around doing African American psychiatric history really informed like how I changed how I worked, because I was a perfectly decent social worker working in adult mental health, working in protection advocacy, around legal issues around mental health. And when I embarked on this project that I did in 2000, I was in a crisis. I was like, I don't know if I can do this work, because now that I understand the history of mental health, the roots of this work, even things that I had questioned before, I now understood how toxic the origins were. And so when I did my project, I started out with the one word, rapotomania. And I was like, oh, I'd never heard that word before. And that unfolded over now a 25-year experience. So I'm really glad to be in this room with you, and I appreciate the work that you're doing. And I look forward for the group to understand some of the beautiful conversations that we had the other day. So it's going to be a conversation.
And I'll go next. I'm again Jennifer Grant. I'm Emory School of Medicine, Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. I do full-time clinical work at Grady, and one of my great passions is actually teaching the postgraduate trainees in psychiatry. I'm one of the directors of the Community, Culture, and Global Health Context portion of the curriculum for psychiatry residents. And I have worked over the past 3 years to reformulate the structure of the curriculum to really dive more deeply into the social structures of mental illness as it is experienced by individuals, as well as we see it as clinicians and how we treat it. I think for tonight, actually, most significantly, I am a friend of Kylie Smith and an honored colleague that she has pulled me into her work. Because I can say that as I've gotten to know her and grown in my overall understanding and engagement with the social structures of psychiatry, it is most important to me to work through the realm of teaching, but in any way possible to really shift how we engage with people who are experiencing mental health conditions, and that we redefine what that means in the structures that have existed to create not only what is experienced, but how we talk about it and how we care for it. So I'm happy to be here today to hopefully ask some questions and maybe offer some insight from sort of like the on the ground side of it. But this work is profoundly connected to how people are living today. And it's not by coincidence, and it's not by just sheer legacy, but really the structure that has been built in psychiatry. And so this, I can't speak, significantly enough about how important this book and Kylie's work has been. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. I'm happy to have you here and to be in conversation with these two amazing women. So you heard like a little bit about the kind of who I supposedly am in terms of the the things that apparently matter, but they actually don't really matter. So I thought I would say a little bit about how I came to do this work and to kind of situate myself in it. I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm a white woman not from here. I'm from the other side of the world. I've always been, my PhD was on the history of psychiatry and the creation of juvenile delinquency as a category, and how psychiatry played into this kind of confinement of young people. And then I started to think about the way that nurses were part of that story. I happened to be working with the Dean of Nursing in Australia, who was really interested in history, and he understood its importance for future healthcare professionals. And then the job kind of came along at Emory, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'll apply and move myself halfway across the world. And so when I did that, I was working on this book on psychiatric nurses, who I think are very underlooked in the history of mental health generally, and actually one of the most hands-on providers. And they're very influential actually in shaping psychiatric practice in institutional settings. And so I actually came to this story because I tracked quite a famous American psych nurse, Hildegard. And I remember finding her in her archive this little slip of paper that fell out, and she'd been at the Peachtree Hotel in Atlanta in 1954 running advanced training kind of symposium for women nurses here in Atlanta. And if you think about that, the Peachtree Hotel was highly segregated in 1954. And the little note that fell out was, "Dear Hilda, a group of Black nurses would like to meet you in the ballroom at lunchtime." And it struck me that those women would have had to come in through the service entrance. And I tracked some of them, and they were all kind of originating from Tuskegee in Alabama, which was really one of the few places that you could do a bachelor's degree in nursing at that time. In fact, Tuskegee was the first place you could do a baccalaureate degree in this whole country, by the way, in 1948, but that's another story. So I started to think about how the history of psychiatry is so centered around white people and the white experience. And I started to think about, why is that the case? And I think it was really born, really made obvious to me that like nurses were working in this segregated system, and I was working in a school of nursing where, when I first started, I gave a lecture in the first kind of, becoming a professional nurse, and there were literally like 7 women of color here sitting at the front, and then the rest of the lecture hall was full of young white women. And I remember when I'd come for my interview, I'd asked someone, how does segregation play out in Atlanta these days? And literally the person said to me, "Oh, we don't have that problem anymore." And then I came here and I'm like, yes, you do. I don't know whether I just like, it was so obvious to me, or I was naive, or I don't know. I was just like, why are people not talking about this? So I thought, oh, okay, maybe I should try and talk about it. And then I realized why people aren't talking about it. Partly because people don't want to talk about it, but also because the archival stuff was really, really hard. I remember many times thinking about writing this book and, waking up after another day in, the Alabama Department of Archives and History thinking, what am I doing in Montgomery, Alabama? And why is there nothing here about people, right? Like it was in the book is what became one of the appendices about how difficult it is to kind of tell anything about the experience of the person who is, I was going to say incarcerated, and so I will just say incarcerated in these psych hospitals in the South, which really kind of struck me as kind of wild because, I remember saying to someone, "Oh, I'm working on this book about Central State Hospital here in Milledgeville. You all know how important that place is to the history of Georgia." And someone said to me, "Well, we don't put out crazy in asylums in Georgia. We just put them on the porch and give them a cocktail." And I was like, "Yeah, no, actually, you do put them in asylums. You put 13,000 of them in an asylum here in Georgia." So it just started to really kind of come home to me, these massive silences in the record, in what people knew. So yeah, that's kind of how I came to the project. I'm also very well aware of my privilege of being a white woman, being at Emory. And so that has really shaped the approach to the book and the way I approached it. I really didn't want it to be, there are lots of things I didn't want it to be. I didn't want it to be like a white history where the Black experience is a footnote or a comparison. I really wanted to try and shift that and to center it. And so that shaped the kind of the structure of the book and the stories that especially the story that starts the book, Mrs. Hurston and her family. And I did a few different things ethically that historians often don't think about how I use the books that I found. My position of memory and having that kind of power behind me and what that meant, was I'm like in my little car driving across the South, and the doors that were opened to me because I was from this institution, which I really was very naive about when I first came to Atlanta. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to work at some place called Emory. And then I got here, I'm like, oh, okay. And so being the person that I am, which is a terribly radical little rebel, I have been trying to undermine that that power since the day I kind of got here. My dean just walked in, and she can tell you about me being a pain in the ass. Sorry for my language, but yeah. So that's kind of how I came to it. But I do want to say that I'm very well aware of the fact that I am a white woman and that I'm trying to tell a story, and I didn't want to speak for other people, but I really want to make a space for people. So yeah, that's kind of the approach, and that's how I approach the book. Yeah.
Talked about the letter and the way you start and the intentionality. Do you mind talking maybe a little bit about that letter?
Yeah. So I will never forget the day I found that letter. So I can count on one hand how many letters I found from Black family members in the official archives in Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi, like literally 5 of them, amongst thousands of letters from white folks, right? White people writing about wanting to get a family member committed, wanting to get a family member out, wanting to inquire about conditions, white people had no problem writing to the governor, because that's where most of the papers are, in the governor's records, writing to the governor and saying, what about my family member? And I only found 5 of such letters from Black folks. That does not mean that Black people were not writing to the governor, right? This is the real, I think it's an evidence of deliberate silencing, right? What gets kept. So I found Mrs. Hurston's letter in the papers of John Stennis, who is a famous segregationist. He was a senior senator for Mississippi, and in his papers, and it was, longhand from, had her name, and Claudette Hurston from Vicksburg, Mississippi, and she actually wrote her letter to the secretary of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, and this is 1965. And she was talking about how she had an 11-year-old son with quite serious mental illness, and how she couldn't find anywhere for him in the state of Mississippi. That there was a state school, there still is a state school for children called Ellisville Hospital, and they were entirely not accepting of Black kids. And so her 11-year-old son had been bouncing in and out of the jail for 5 years. So he had first gone to jail when he was 6 years old. And she talked about how he was out of control, and she had 4 other kids, and she didn't know what to do, and why would somebody not help her? And she said that she'd written to the president, and she'd written to all of these people, and she'd had not a single response. And she finally got a response from a person in charge of the Department of what was then called Mental Health and Mental Retardation in HEW, and he wrote back to her and said, we're very sorry that this is happening to you. And he CC'd the governor, and he CC'd the senators, and all of that kind of stuff. And on the side of Stennis's letter in red pencil is written, no reply. And I sat with that. I thought about it for a minute, and I remember I was at a workshop for the digital monograph writers workshop that I was a part of at the Fox Center. God bless the Fox Center. And I was talking about it because, you know, the book was going to be open access, and it is open access. And I was like, I don't know, maybe, you know, I was having quandaries about using the letter. Should I use this letter? And someone said to me, why don't you look her up? And I'm like, really? And they're like, yeah, there's this thing called Google, and you can like Google her. And I'd never really done that as a historian before. You know, it's kind of a little bit taboo. Like, you don't go delving too deep into people's personal lives. And also historians, most people would think, oh, I found that letter, that's fair game, right? That's a letter in the archives. It's an unrestricted archive. I can use that letter. And I just was like, fine. And I found for her not long before, and I wrote to the contact, the pastor at the Refuge Temple in Jackson, Mississippi, and I said, "This is totally random. I found this letter. Do you know Mrs. Hurston?" And he wrote back to me in about an hour, and he was like, "Oh yeah." I know Mother Hurston, and he said her son is a deacon in the church and he would like to talk to you. And so I called Ronald, and we had a lovely conversation. And I said, I found this letter from your mother. Can I read it to you? And I read it to him, and he was like, got very emotional on the other end of the phone. And then he told me that you can read in the prologue of the book that, you know, and I'm going to send you that and include it in the book or not. And if he had said no, I wouldn't have included it, which was like this moment of potential heartbreak, because it was a beautiful letter, and it was like a gold mine, right? It's a eureka moment in the archives. And thankfully he was very willing, and I got to meet the family. I thought maybe we'd go somewhere fancy, and they said, no, let's go to the Cracker Barrel in Pearl. So we went to the Cracker Barrel in Pearl, and they've really been really wonderful people and really a highlight of my life, you know. So there it is, me making it about me. But I think what really struck me about them was just this sense of solidarity in this family, They had been through so much. And the story about his mother, and that she'd been a huge civil rights activist, and she knew who to write to, and it was just an incredible story. So that's why you get the Hurston family story at the beginning of the book.
I'm so glad that you mentioned sort of like the rest of her story, right, and who she was as a person beyond the letter, because I think that actually does, to me, also speak to the few letters that were within the archive. I'm sure that, again, there were many more Black families that wrote, but I think it does say something to the fact that she carried with her this resilience and this resistance to the status quo that led her to advocate. And what I also next, you know, again starts, and it's not, and to me, I talk about this quite a bit moving into Black History Month, how, you know, there needs to be a balance of just, let's just talk about all of the African American pioneers and like rah 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 all the good things, versus like, okay, let's talk about the suffering. Let's talk about the role of what resistance, what, you know, engaging in, you know, empowering ourselves to advocate for ourselves, you know, what does that mean, you know, in this story. And I think it's so important, to me at least. It was a beautiful letter, but I think adding to it, and this is the woman who wrote it, and these are the children that she bore, and these are the stories of what happened in their life. You know what I mean? Like that has meaning as well.
Yeah, they're amazing people.
Yeah. You know, the other thing, Kelly, I don't think you were making it about you, because I think the other part, when you invite people invite you into their story, is that you build a relationship with them. And this is not a relationship, in my experience, that really ends. I think that you carry them, they carry you, because of how you held that story and then built all this other work around it. So,
yeah, it did really shape the rest of the book. Those detailed account of these 3 state hospital systems, it became really a collection of stories, right? In a way, around any chance I could find of patient voices or family voices. Like, they really became the driving force for how I structured the rest of the book. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, there are 2 things I was actually thinking about, one that we've talked about before, but actually that came to mind when you were kind of sharing about your journey to this book was, you know, in teaching about psychosis, I always say that humans are, and the human mind is a meaning making machine. And so I usually say that in sense of, you know, saying that all of us are actually getting incomplete data to put it together. Deranged, I'm not saying it in a pejorative way, you know, we experience hallucinations, delusions, etc. And to the flip side of that is that reality is actually quite subjective. When you were speaking about kind of how you came to this work, I realized that as I was reading your book, I loved so much that you contextualized what was present and what was absent, as well as you regularly checked in with yourself and saying, this is who I am as I read this, right? Like, I recognize that the information I'm putting together is, you know, in large part what's in front of me, but it also, the story that I'm building is also informed by what's not in front of me and by who I am in looking at that story, right? That is what I'm presenting to you, and I'm going to grapple with it.
Yeah.
I feel like, me being in the sciences my whole life, having in many ways a resistance to history, is because no one actually acknowledged those spaces. And I don't know if that is something that is, you know, prevalent within, you know, history manuscripts or not, but I think that was among the other many things that I think are meaningful, particularly to the field of psychiatry. In terms of like what's in this book, I think that's so significant to me, because we are, again, meaning making machines, and we have to be responsible for you're grappling with this, as well as, and when I say responsible, I also mean that then not assuming that it is consistent across all spaces, right? But, you know, and saying like, and I'm acknowledging all of these things and not using them as assumptions.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because there were some parts, there were like points in my life, or like of the, I say my life, but this book has been pretty consuming for quite some time now. And there were times when I was like, I cannot write this book. Like, there's nothing here, right? There was really, if I really was focused on wanting to center always, as much as I could, the Black point of view, I was really struggling. And I talked to my editor, Lucas, and at UNC Press, God bless you, Lucas. And I said, I can't write it in the way that historians do, right? Historians have this habit of writing a book, writing a history as if it fell completely, you know, fully formed in their lap, right? That is not, that's just like, that's not how it happens, folks. Like, sorry to bust the myth, but historians make the stories, right? We actively make it from what is there. And some people will say, well, you know, we just tell you the facts, but that's also not what we do. We can actually only tell you what we find in the official sources. And if you are only relying on official sources like the Alabama Department of Archives and History, you are not going to be able to tell the whole story, right? And it was really shocking to me what should have been there and what was not there. That is particularly the case with Georgia. That might be something we want to talk about in the Q&A about the state of records, right? That people are looking for family records and what should be there and is not there. And so I ended up writing the book in that very way, and it being very clear that I am only telling you a part of the story that I have access to. I think there are many more stories that I don't have access to. This is not a complete history, you know, and to just be really kind of overt and honest about that. Yeah.
You know, I want to kind of jump in there about the, like, what's it, because I remember going to the Alabama archives in like 2000, and what was not in there But then at that point, there was something in there that I actually found kind of disturbing. And I'm coming not from a historian or archivist position. I wasn't sure it's a very good point. Because there's a photo of that photo, you've probably seen it too, and of a famous person's father. And whole person's thing, and it's like the family that this photo's in here. Like, so of what was in this Black person's file was something I know that the family didn't know was in there. Not in, and you went to, let's say, two of the toughest states, with Mississippi and Alabama specifically in their records, and yet you persisted and pulled out these important stories.
Yeah.
Because those two states in particular, I think, were especially terrible.
Yeah.
With record keeping about Black people's mental health.
Yeah, very deliberately so.
And I think there is something to be said, as if, you know, if a historian presents information as, well, this is what's available there, therefore this is what is.
Yeah.
You know, we are being embracing those histories, right? Without acknowledging that this is what is here, but there could be meaning in what is left out.
Yeah.
You know,
absolutely.
and I do that meaning.
Yeah.
And I think you did a really beautiful way of carrying that thread throughout the book.
Yeah. I was informed by some really great historical theorists, right? And I've written about that in the back of the book, in the appendix, about this idea of reading against the grain and reading between the lines, and that you should never take an official archival source as a gospel because of who's creating those records in the first place, right? I've never walked into a wider place than the Alabama Department of Archives and History. Confederate statue in the photo. I'm like, okay, this is how it's going to be here.
I literally was in Montgomery yesterday.
So
it's a very white, the whole complex is very, very white. Yeah,
like literally like white Gothic marble. And it was an education for, girl from Sydney. For sure. I was thinking about something that you said then too about the way that you the difficulty of those particular states in particular, and I think that also but I also got lucky, I think, in thinking about other ways to approach things. So okay, if there's no, like, you can go to Alabama and look for, like, actually remind me about the photo before I forget. There's no, like, single source that says Bryce Hospital or Searcy Hospital. Like, you really have to know how to navigate the actual, like, categorization, and you end up looking through the governor's papers under a record group called State Institutions, and so then you get to read about all the other state institutions at the same time. So I was busy taking photos and scans about the institutions for children, which will be the next project. And so this book doesn't include children because that is a whole other minefield, right? And the ethics. So I've been sitting on a court case I have patient files of children, but court cases were actually a really useful. And I was kind of lucky in a way that Alabama decided to fight and go to court rather than integrate. And so I'm very lucky finding a court case, a desegregation court case in Alabama that was actually argued in front of Judge Frank Johnson, a major kind of civil rights judge. And then I was very lucky to be able to talk to the lawyer who argued that case for the Legal Defense Fund. Big shout out to Conrad Harper, and amazing to talk to him too about his story. Like, I nearly wrote his story. He was like the only Black man in his school in his class at Harvard, and he did a summer internship with the LDF, and then Thurgood Marshall offered him a job at the LDF, and then the first case he was given was this case in Alabama. And he talked about coming down to Alabama at 27 years old and standing in the chambers of Judge Frank Johnson, like this major, like, civil rights judge, looking down from his desk at him, and he said, what were Conrad's words? He said something like, you knew that something was in the air. It was just to be part of that moment. Yeah. But the other thing about the photos, so there are decisions that I made not to include some photos, which I think is important to acknowledge. And I did write about that. I found a photo in, again, it's funny what you find. So the director of the Whitfield Hospital in Mississippi, he ruled that hospital for a long time, for something like 30 years. And then he had a stroke and he was actually put in Whitfield. And his scrapbooks were really comprehensive. And I found this photo of a white woman sitting at a table with two black women standing behind her holding plates of food. Like, what the is this? And it had no kind of like caption or anything. And then I found a clipping of the newspaper article that the photo was used for. And it was actually his wife. And she was sitting at a table. And the two women behind her were patients from the hospital, two black women. And they were named in the newspaper article. And the story was about how Mrs. Jaquith, was a terrible cook. And Dr. Jaquith threatened them with, like, you said, we're all going to starve if you don't learn to cook, woman. But for her to learn to cook, she used patients from the hospital, and then she used them at home. She called them her girls, and they cleaned her kitchen. And this is like 1960 something. And I was just kind of, all sorts of feelings, right? But I decided not to use the photo because I didn't have those women's permission. So yeah, that played a role in what photos are and are not in the book. Yeah. Again, I think a different historian would have just used them, right? Because they're in an archive and they're free game. I didn't think they were mine to use in that way. Yeah.
I could go so many ways. Because one of the things, it's like, because this is where coming in, like when I started doing I was not an archivist, wasn't a historian, had no ethical framework. And
most historians don't, by the way.
Well, but also coming at it from like a consumer survivor ex-patient perspective. And I'm going around to these places and with Pat Deegan. I don't know if you know Pat Deegan, who does incredible work, psychiatric liberation activist, psychologist. And I just remember being one place, and they in North Carolina, where they had like what we now know to be 2,000 photos of patients, and they were showing us these photos, and it's like, oh wow, if there was a CVS, we would have had all those files off of that computer, because Pat's point is that's our history,
right?
And about the ownership and what are they going to do with it. But I think we spent a lot of time in North Carolina talking about ethics of care and what do we do. And at the same time, for me, coming from a activist perspective and a clinical perspective, is we got to tell some of this story to keep it, to interrupt what's happening. If we don't understand like what happened to us and how it's continuing to happen to us. And so there's this really the tension about when we have these stories and have your book and other books like that to say, it's telling us what went down. It's telling us what's still happening.
Right.
And so what do we do about it?
Right.
And so in looking at it, so I'm also kind of curious, because we were having some conversation about like the access to patient files, which oftentimes for historians and other folks are really important and really hard to get and also very problematic. And quite frankly, Jennifer, you might say, oftentimes psychiatric or clinical notes tell us more about the person writing the note than it ever told us about the patient. But so that dilemma around how do we get the stories of folks who are long deceased, and also with the privacy concerns.
It's a really good point. And I think I remember the first time I gave a talk about the Alabama story that I was kind of uncovering. It was a History of Medicine conference in LA in 2018. And just in case you're wondering, the first question from one of the audience members was, do you have patient records? And I was like, I really wish people would stop asking me this. Partly because I don't think people understood that there are none, right? Like, I remember one of the first things I did was I actually got asked by the ACLU to help them find the records of a patient that they were representing who had been at Milledgeville. And I knew the patient records weren't there, but I really didn't know much more beyond that. And I remember walking in there with this lawyer, and the head archivist came out and she said, so even though you have permission from this patient, I can tell you that their records are not here. They have never been here. They should have been here. And you would need to bring a class action against the state of Georgia because they have not been depositing the records where they should be. So they should be freely available in the state archives, but they're being housed in a storage facility, unprocessed, right? And people are being given this runaround, told that you can appeal to the county court to find your family records. All you're going to get from a county court is maybe a probate judge saying, yes, that person was committed, and maybe a death certificate. Actual literal patient records about what happened on a day-to-day basis are not there. But also, I don't think I would have used them. I think, I would say that the only thing they tell you is what a physician thought. And because I've seen these other patient records from a court case that I may or may not write about one day, I've seen the judgments and the type of words that the physicians use, and how this kind of bias is so built in, because the categories, the way that a physician is looking for signs of illness or not, are so fraught, right? And so a lot of them, I just can't believe that people were this stupid, right? So a white physician would write, black patient, blah, 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 won't look at me, looks at the floor, has a low affect, therefore is schizophrenic. And I'm just like, oh my God. I am not a psychiatrist, and I know that that's not what's going on there. If you can't understand the power relation, you're a white man in a white coat, and you're sitting there and you're wondering. And then the other thing about is, if a person says something to you about, civil rights or wanting those people were so constrained, it's just so hard for people to understand, I think, the power dynamics, but also the context of that time, right? We're talking about the 1960s and 1950s, where if you're a black psychiatric patient in one of these huge hospitals and you want to advocate for yourself, forget it. That's a sign of mental illness. That's a sign of aggression, and that is what I see continuing. Right?
And I would actually argue, and again, maybe, I'm way off base, but I would also honestly argue that I think that if you had included you include patient stories, right? And you include some physician notes and documentation, but I think if you had presented the story from that perspective, the psychology of people would actually focus in on what makes this individual different, so that they can justify the differences in care.
Yes.
And what I think actually is much more powerful from the clinician's perspective is, I was actually looking when you were talking about the women with the plates of food, and then I'm looking at this garment that you can speak about that you have at your side, is that you have two people in two different hospitals there for, I'm just making something, depression. And in this hospital, they are sewing clothes and cooking for the doctor's wife. And at this other, hospital, they're gardening. You see what I'm saying? And you're just generally, again, giving one similarity and saying, look at the difference in treatment. And then as a clinician, I can actually tell you there are still similarities today based on the hospitals. I won't say names, but hospitals in Atlanta, two different ones, same depression, totally different days and experiences. But again, the way we're wired is that I believe many people in the room were like, well, what was different about them? And it's going to discount the fact that the systems have been set up for decades, for generations, to provide different levels of care. And there is a framework and an origin of that difference. And that's what this book is going to show very convincingly. That has nothing to do with them being different in any sort of way. This was set up this way, two different systems of care, and it still exists. And I honestly, I do feel like, we would use those to break down that argument.
Yeah. And I'd also say that it wasn't just in the 50s and 60s, that if today somebody is in that position about power and just having, when I was a social worker, one of the things that was interesting when I became able to involuntary, it was work. I hated that. And people would say, well, why do you spend so much time with people when you have to go to a 1013? I said, if I'm going to deprive people of their liberty, I need to hear their whole story. We need to talk about it. I need to stay with them as long as I can stay with them, because I had also been doing protection and advocacy, so I understood where they were going. And so I think there's really this opportunity. And again, this is why I always come back to is we have to tell these stories. We have to tell this history because it continues to inform the work that we do today. And I'm always very curious about like someone doing like a financial assessment around these segregated hospitals versus what the money that was put into white hospitals versus what people had to do in Black hospitals and the level of care that was provided and the exploitation of all patients, but specifically the exploitation of Black patients.
Yeah. So. I mean, these hospitals ran on the back of the Black patient, literally. Like, you know, I remember seeing this, one of the first photos I saw, which was of, you know, Black men working a cotton field, you know, and there was a white man on a horse, and the picture says, the caption says, you know, State Farm Colony for Negroes, Alabama, patients working a field with overseer. And I'm like, well, that is a plantation.
Yeah. And I think you even said that in the book somewhere, and I'm sure I'm misquoting it, but that basically psychiatry in the South was developed in the shadow of the plantation system.
Yeah. I use Christina Sharp's idea of the wake, you know, and the way that the plantation and slavery ripples through generations. So, yeah, I mean, and I tried to like second guess myself with that all the time. Like, oh, no, it's not really a plantation. That's a bit excessive, Kylie. Like, really, maybe you don't know what you're talking about because you're not from here, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, but it looks like a plantation.
It's cotton over there.
When it's a colony farm, I think you really kind of know it's a colony farm and those kind of things.
It's built on what used to actually be a plantation.
Exactly, right.
I'm sorry, but it's a plantation. But anyway, yeah.
Well, I realized that we were so into this. So it's an opportunity, though, for some questions from the audience here. And also if there's anyone online, folks have something. I have a question right here.
Yep.
Good evening. Thanks, y'all, for being here. This is a question I've tried to ask before, and I never feel like I quite capture it. But I'm interested in how you feel about the systems versus the people in those systems, the doctors and the nurses in those systems.
Ooh, yeah.
And if it, you know, to put it briefly, for me, you know, white Americans and therefore white doctors and nurses, you know, are really broken in their ability to see humanity in Black people accurately.
Yeah.
So ... If we were able to just give so many resources to Morehouse School of Medicine and other institutions and fill these institutions with Black doctors and practitioners, how much would this illness and dysfunction, would the needle be able to be moved, or would the system that surrounds those practitioners still sort of propagate?
No, so I'll just be frank, right? Like, you know, and I'm going to say this, I'm leaving the country, so I'm the first thing I say to all of my students is get the idea that the system is broken out of your head. The system is working exactly as it was designed. And that is why it's working the way it is. Like, it benefits white men, like, end of story. And it benefits the white men who run it, right? Like, let's not forget who created a segregated healthcare system, who created a ridiculous system of tying insurance to work. Like, again, like, I'm from another planet in relation to that. So, you know, like, it works as it's designed, and it's designed to keep the boot on the neck of Black folks. That is what it's designed to do. It is designed to keep people unwell, like, downtrodden. That is what it is designed to do. So in that sense, I think it should be abolished, right? Like, but I believe in mental health care, and I think people need more and better health care. Is it possible to do anti-racist mental health care? I don't know. I think there have been attempts, and I thank God every day that people like Jennifer and Vanessa are in this system. But they are also like the work that Jennifer has had to do to even like deal with her own training. You know what I mean? Like the training itself is racist. The diagnoses are racist. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so like tear it all down.
Well, from the roots of it, I mean,
Right.
one of the things
Drive to mania,
I mean, it's
right?
drive to mania. It's like the illness that causes people to run away from their masters. It's like, no, that's
That's
and
actually a sign of
and like
sanity.
and whipping was like one of the treatments. So it's like really, and so but the thing that also though, what is possible though, this is where it does, where people are always breaking through. So even places like there were two Black run segregated hospitals, Lincoln State Hospital and Taft, which Taft is almost lost to the records. So there was, but Lincoln State Hospital that I spent some time with at there, and including the fact when you talk about the letters and stuff, I was able to look at some family letters that the social workers had pulled out of a burning barrel because they were burning records. And so and you see these letters, people are desperately trying. They were not abandoning their families. They were desperately trying to get support.
Yep.
Also, Lincoln State Hospital was Black top to bottom. I remember when I opened up the archives and saw this picture of the superintendent, and it looked like a family photo. And one of the things that was interesting when I talked with the social workers, it's like, you know, when you're in a place like Lincoln, which we are dealing with the racism ourselves, is that there was a lot of innovation. There was tons of innovation. Crownsville Hospital in Maryland had like one of the early family therapy programs. There they used volunteers to do family therapy. And so there was lots of innovations in the midst of horrendous underfunding and blatant racism and all kind of things. And so to me, that's what's exciting when I sit there and look at what people did even in these segregated facilities and the kind of relationships. So the first thing I did was only consumer survivor patients' voices, but I kept hearing stories, and I also had to make some meaning for myself as a social worker. Now that I understood the history of mental health, is that were we doing anything good? And that's where I did start to see these the innovative practices and resistance and solidarity.
Right, and I think it's important really to acknowledge that. And I was very fortunate to be able to spend some time at the Tuskegee archives, and I found this, you know, story about a little mental hygiene clinic that doctors from the VA in Tuskegee were trying to run as an outpatient clinic for people in Macon County, right? And they ran that clinic from 1947 to about 1963, and it was really innovative, and it was designed to keep people out of the state hospital system because they knew how bad it was. And they still had limitations. They had to work within the system themselves. And I'm channeling Susan Reverby talking about how they are science men as well as race men, right? And so there's still this tension in what's in the science that they themselves were sometimes caught in. But within that framework, they're trying to do something different. And so to me, like, you know, I published that as an article about towards an anti-racist psychiatry.
And then actually, that's exactly what I was going to say, is that, you know, in terms of speaking about, you know, more providers of color, more providers of marginalized identities, I absolutely work on that, you know, within our department with recruitment. It's not enough because, just to speak of one issue, anti-Black racism crosses race lines, crosses gender lines, crosses ethnicity, crosses nationality. And it is, like, as you said to start, it is built within the system. And so it is not just enough to have Black providers, because in the lectures that I give, I will tell you, you know, I will go through a patient case across years, and I will speak about the different providers who engaged with this individual, the different providers who misdiagnosed them, prescribed inappropriately. They are Black, they are Asian, they are white, they are trained within the United States, they're trained outside of the United States. You see what I'm saying? And none of them are bad people, but they were trained to do it a way that has been embedded in a system of viewing people differently. And so when I spoke on Wednesday with the residents, you know, I started my lecture with, let us introduce ourselves from our positions of privilege and marginalization. let us be honest with who we are showing up to this conversation. This is where I might have power in the room, and this is where I might feel weak and vulnerable in the room. And I want to show up being aware and holding that so that I can recognize that everyone else in the room and the person who is inherently less powerful than me, as the patient, I'm aware and conscious of this disparity. And I would argue, I hope, that anyone can do that work, but we have to do anti-racist work. And then still, that is still on at the level of the individual. And right now we continue to see psychiatry as an individual definition, as well as an individual interaction between the provider and the patient. And so much of it is a system, and so you can have the most well-meaning people, and I only want to show up again in my conscious world. There are many subconscious things going on, I know, but consciously when I go to work, all I do want to do is help people, but I still have to operate within a system that is very, very flawed, not by accident, not because we need to grow, not because things are broken, but it was set up this way. And so I need to not only work on myself to unlearn a lot that's been in this training, but I also need to work to dismantle the system because it is handicapping all of us.
Hence the flaming license.
Yeah.
But are there some online questions?
Yeah, we have some online questions. I think we got at least one more around the corner there.
There's one over here too.
Great. So we have one person just sort of asking, who is the target audience for your book? In part because she says, most adult Black people know already, at least in the U.S., this history. And so she's like, are you intending this for sort of a white audience, or is this for younger Black people?
Geez, it's a really good question. It's funny you should say that because I did a Ask Me Anything on Reddit the other day, and a person made this really interesting comment about all you pop historians. I'm sorry, I do pop history. You're just documenting every bad thing that ever happened to us, or no, that happened to Black folks. And what is the point of that? Like, can't we just have an umbrella? Yeah, it was bad. And I was like, sorry to bore you with the details, bro. Like, it was sort of like in response to your question, like you do actually need the specifics, right? Sorry, I went off on a tangent there, but I would say that guy's not my audience, but actually that is the audience, right? The people who don't know the details, right? Like it's not, and also the fact that it's not just this relic of history. It is still happening. So in that sense, I would say, and I always get a kick out of, working with Jennifer and talking to the residents at Grady. I really love doing that. I have some students here in the classroom, and I love talking to them, and their eyes just going, "Oh my God, what?" And especially when they're going to be future healthcare providers. Like when I think about things that I've wanted to achieve over the last 10 years or whatever at Emory, and some of the things that didn't work, I think about the impact at that level, right? Like students, so future healthcare providers, and absolutely people practicing in the field. But also, again, it's kind of an interesting book because it's the second half of the book is also about the civil rights battle. And so I really wanted to insert, I guess, psychiatry into a conversation about civil rights, because psychiatry is about deciding who is a human being, who is a worthwhile citizen, what is normal. And so that is for everyone, right? That is an issue for all of us who think that some people shouldn't have rights or some people shouldn't be allowed to vote or whatever. So that is a really in that sense, I think it's for everyone in this country right now. Y'all.
Yes.
Attention.
Yes.
Attention. Yeah.
We have another question. This person says they recently read Madness, Race, and Insanity in a Jim Crow Asylum by Antonia Hilton, I think.
Yeah.
Hilton. And they were horrified to learn that Black men and boys held at Crownsville in Maryland built a facility that would hold some of them.
Yeah.
How common was this practice across the South?
It happened everywhere. Yeah, and they didn't just build the facilities that they were then incarcerated in. They continued to farm, grow animals, kill and slaughter animals to feed the rest of the population. The women made the straitjackets. Like literally, the patients were the backbone of the hospitals. Wouldn't have functioned in any way without the Black patients actually doing the hard labor. They were labor camps.
Yeah, and one of the things that's interesting, when I was at Charis Hospital years ago, and I was a lovely Black family invited me to come, and they were and I was able to interview the father who had worked on the wards, and he was probably at that point in his 90s, and they were talking about their child care provider who was a patient. And I'm sitting there going like, wait a second. And like, well, Richard was this, and he just, and I said, I'm sorry, you know, I've eaten your cake and everything, but I need to ask this question. It's like, if I can't think of a more trusted position than raising someone's child. If he was able to do that,
Why was he confined?
Why was he there?
why can't he go home? And they looked kind of stunned, and I understand the power of things, because as the Black patients there, the Black staff there were under pretty oppressive conditions, but it was like these different layers of oppression, and the way that it wasn't even considered that they could have a skin like
right. And no, I was just going to say it's really interesting because, you know, I just talked about Dr. Jaquith's wife, right? And she is the woman in the kitchen. But Dr. Jaquith himself was really interesting. And when he arrived at Whitfield in Mississippi in 1947, he was made aware of this 3,000-acre farm that he inherited that was being worked by Black patients. And he just said, I told the administration that I was not in the farming business. I was a doctor. And if a patient was well enough to work a farm, they should be well enough to go home. But he was not able to break it down, right? Like he tried and there was resistance, and, you know, it's, yeah. So,
and I think I think it goes back to, you know, this argument that I obviously believe in sciences. I have 2 doctorates, you know, but that psychiatry is purely scientific in terms of a field. But you also have to think about if there was benefit to keeping these people confined in all of these different ways, how did they twist the diagnosis, the treatment modalities, like truly arguing like this is healing for Black people to be in the field.
Occupational therapy.
You know, that's occupational therapy. You know, think about how they had to twist this quote science to make it make sense for the capitalist and segregationist and racist priorities that existed within that society. And so to go back to the question of who is this for, I would honestly argue it's for anyone dealing in healthcare and mental health. Absolutely anyone. A book that I bought here is called Healing Justice Lineages, and it's telling the stories of activism throughout time. Anyone who is engaged in activist work, because there are amazing stories that are empowering about consumers as well as providers who had to go against the grain and had to be innovative in a system that was confined, you know, as well as anyone doing scholarly work. Because again, to actually tell these stories in an ethical way is in and of itself, you know, a very intentional act. But I think that, you know, there is something to sort of making sense of how all of this is put together and like really saying like, so we thought it's this, but come on, how can it be this when this is what was happening? And why does it look the same today? You know? Right.
We got, I think you had your hand up first.
I just wondered if you would talk about how you got to your ethical stance on how you use records. What informed that?
Thanks, Amanda. I did not tell her to ask that question. I think the first thought for me was always my own positionality, right? Always conscious of the fact that who the hell was I as a white woman to tell this story, right? And I was very wary of it. And I was like, oh, I don't know. And there were times I'm like, I shouldn't be doing this. And I thought, but no one else is doing it. Like, we need these kind of stories. And I remember talking to Cynthia over at Tuskegee, and she was like, I hope you know that the fact that you're white doesn't mean you can't tell this story. You know, and I tried to think about how, you know, if we had to be from the time and the place or the race or whatever of the story, story that we're writing as historians, and no one would ever write medieval history, right? Like, so, you know, and I don't think a lot of historians ever question that, right? But I do remember, you know, a shout out to another book that I was involved in during the last 10 years. It kind of became obvious, I think, really during COVID, I think. And I was part of an online, well, no, let me go back a bit. So I presented at an online conference that Dr. Courtney Thompson from Mississippi State organized called Archival Kismet. And it was this conference about weird things you found in the archive that you, or things that you found in the archives that you know, don't know what to do with. And so I presented about these children's case files that I'd found here in Georgia, and that I didn't know what to do with them. And it was this real kind of ethical kind of dilemma. And Courtney talked about how she was having some of the same issues with some stuff that she was doing. And then we established this working group again during COVID. So we were all at home, bored, like nothing worse than a bored historian, you know, online. And so we had this online group through the Consortium for the History of Science, Technology and Medicine, and it became a book called Do Less Harm, Ethical Questions for Health Historians. And so there are two things that really informed my ethical approach. One was, again, the decentering. Like I wouldn't call it privacy, but because I think privacy is a bit difficult when it comes to history. If privacy is the thing that you're centering, then you're not going to write history, right? Like, but it really about how you decenter whiteness in the history, right? That was really the key. And then the second piece was the idea of reparations. So when I thought about what is my role, who am I, a white person telling this story, I'm like, because you're white, like it's your job, like it's my responsibility. I need to be accountable. It doesn't matter that I didn't do these things, right? It's whiteness that does these things, and that is my problem. And so I read a lot about this idea of reparatory history. And in the book Do Less Harm, which you can buy from Johns Hopkins University Press, I have a chapter on reparatory history, and it's the same motivation that is behind reparations for slavery. And I remember being really like outraged when the American Psychiatric Association put out its little lame little, oh, we're so sorry for all the racist things we did in the past statement in 2021. I'm like, you have no idea what you did. I'm going to tell you what you did. Yeah. So I think that something is owed. Yeah.
All right. Here we go.
Hello. So I'll give you a little background to the question. So I moved to Atlanta recently for an internship in psychology, and I did that to try to make system-wide change, and have reached a lot of resistance already, and I'm not done yet with even my degree. So it's kind of a two-part question. Like, what advice would you give for trying to start to make some change within the system? And then how do you care for yourself to avoid getting burnt out from the resistance?
I'll just start from a historian's point of view, and then maybe the clinicians can talk as from an academic point of view. Like, I don't know, I'm still traumatized and burnt out. Yeah, my response is to leave the country. I mean, I knit, you know, like I knit so I don't stab people. The resistance is real though, and it's really hard. And I guess I've had to, I don't know, I guess I was naive. Like, again, I expected people to be like, oh, yay, this is great. You're like, you know, out there. And I was kind of shocked that people were like, And I'm, is Linda still up there? It was like in a school of nursing. And I thought that people would be open, but they were not. Not like, you can't say those things. Like, that's not who we are. I'm just here as a nurse because I want to help people. I'm like, really interesting. So, you know, the resistance is again built in. And I mean, you see where we are, right? Where we are now is a backlash, right? So I think you have to be committed to it regardless of the outcome, and just do it because it's the right thing to do.
I would also say you don't do it alone. So one of the things that you really do have to find a community people. And one of the things that really helped me, I lead as an activist, but the other part of it is when I was sort of taken in by activists, that made a huge difference because I just got confused or got scared that could support me. So it is not a solitary experience is the first thing I'd say. And there are a lot of people out there doing really good work. And I would certainly link up with people in psychiatric liberation spaces.
Yeah, that's actually what I was going to say, is finding community. And I think for me, even on an interpersonal level, it can be really, isolating and, disheartening to feel like you're the only one screaming into the void. And so to me, at least having people that I can sort of like share my values with, share my perspective. Again, it doesn't even necessarily need to be like, okay, like we're all working on this one project, but like our text groups are like shared anger, shared frustration, shared wins. And then the only other thing I can think of, and again, I don't know that I have all the answers, is something that my mentor in my training and one of our colleagues, Ben Dress, constantly honed in on me was, he's like, all you're focusing on is moving the needle. And so you might come in, which all of us do, or, early in our training, like, I want to change everything. And, looking at, for me, some days it's like, I want to make this person's experience, even if I feel like they need to be hospitalized, they're unsafe on the streets, they're not going to do well. My goal right now is just to help them feel comfortable coming back. I can't get them medicine. I can't get the medicine in them. I can't convince them to stay. And I will do damage keeping them against their will. So my goal for right now is to just help them feel like I care, so that when it does get worse, they feel like they can come back. You know what I mean? And so it's like you have to sort of like adjust your goals to fit one, sustainability, you know what I mean? So that you can stay in the fight, and also so that you can feel like you are making a difference, because this is hard, you know what I mean? But I stayed in Atlanta because I do feel like this is a space where we can make change. I think it's possible, and finding the people to be in it with, and just like, you're working on moving the needle.
I think odd way now, given the clawback of $2 billion in mental health and substance abuse funding.
I think it's more.
Is it $2 billion?
Yeah.
It's what? Yeah. And so, it's devastating, and all the kind of pain that's going to cause. As I said, I think there's this moment where it's all burning down that I think is a space to create new things.
Yeah.
And let's be clear, people have been creating new things. Psychiatric liberation folks have been creating all kind of models. Peer support is not new. I helped set up Georgia's peer support stuff. And when we started, I said, this is going to be a problem. First off, Medicaid will not pay for this. You're going to create a 2-tier system. We have situations where people or activists, peer folks were having their employment things documented in their charts. And so there's all this stuff that we got better than that. But I just think that in this moment, there's a place to move in and take your ideas and share them. I mean, one of the ways that I did mine was I kind of moved into narrative therapy, which was less oppressive than traditional therapists. And then I created my own model of power-based therapy. So I just think that we can do that, and you've got to have the courage. And I know when people are carrying massive student loans, it's not like you want to create a ruckus, but what I tell people when I talk to social workers, who needs a scared social worker? You can't even advocate for yourself.
Right.
You're not going to be able to advocate, and we're all in this together. And I think there's wonderful opportunities for alliances between psychiatric activists and staff. I mean,
Right.
because which we also saw in some of those records.
Yeah.
With NAACP
Yeah.
working with
Mhm.
on patients' rights, because the system is burning down. It never worked. And if you want a really hilarious book, is Masters of Bedlam and the Rise of the Mad Doctoring Trade, which is a history of psychiatry. Best title ever. But you look at all these things, so there's room to create something new, and most people don't go to therapy. and do well sometimes, you know. And so I just think we're gotta, because it won't be there. So take this moment and find people to share ideas with and create something new. We don't have to wait for someone to feed us new theory. We have to create the theory ourselves. Yeah, this is why people don't let me come to their class anymore.
All right, we are actually over time. So I know that there's more questions and more comments probably. So I want to give folks the opportunity to maybe have some one-on-one time with Kylie and get their books signed. I also think we're going to sell out of books, which is a wonderful problem to have. Yeah, I would love for the folks online to click the teal button at the bottom of the screen to buy Jim Crow and the Asylum from us. I also dropped the link to Do Less Harm, which is also orderable from Charis. But you can't get it direct from the publisher. But you know, if you got to order it somewhere local, we would love for you to order it from us.
Buy it here.
Thank you to everybody watching. Again, we had a beautiful big crowd online. I appreciate all the questions and comments there. We're going to go ahead and say goodnight to y'all.
Thank you.
And for every